Ladies and gentlemen, booty crew. I hate saying that. Welcome to the Pirates of Finance, the show where we will do just about anything to get out of talking about finance. We're your hosts. The handsome gentleman next to me is the young Hemingway, Jason Buck.
You're not going to make that
Hofstein. It's going to stick. I'm going to keep saying it till it sticks. Now, for those of you who have been with us a couple weeks, you may be impressed that we actually got that intro to roll. And it is all credit to Tyler, who's working the magic behind the scenes, who literally gave us a step-by-step instruction how to do this foolproof. You could not mess up the intro if you tried. And yet what you did not witness live was that Jason ran the whole intro without taking the show live. So that was the second time Jason and I got to watch it, but every week, inch by inch improvements. Now, before we even get started, right, we got to go through the disclaimers, the disclosures, all the legal rigmarole. Look, this is just two guys having fun on a Friday afternoon, talking about markets, economics, finance, this and that. This is not financial advice. If you are considering taking this as financial advice, please get up out of your chair or wherever you are and find the nearest mirror. And I want you to look deep in your own eyes and consider the life choices that you're making. Because if you're taking financial advice from two strangers on the internet, even if you know us, two guys on the internet, you got some thinking to do. So without further ado, Jason, let's dive in. I want to start by saying it sounds like you're pouring yourself some water. Thank you for showing up to the show horribly hungover. I really appreciate it.
I have no idea what you're talking about, and I do not appreciate your transparency. I like to prefer the never let them see you sweat. We nailed this on the first time. There was no trouble behind the scenes. Nice and smooth, easy peasy. You're drinking one of your patented iced coffees. I see that you've made several of in down in the Cayman Islands, which I always appreciated.
Listen, you gotta be constantly caffeinated to get through the day, as I found. So, look, we're both hitting the it's Friday afternoon. We're both hitting the caffeine train. We're gonna get this. Maybe it's a little slow to start, but we're gonna get this show started. I know you have some updates on the rum side, which is exciting. But before I even go there, I want to toss you a softball, because this is a question that has been coming up a lot for me this year, which means I know it's coming up a ton for you, which is this idea of an all-weather portfolio. And what does that even mean? First, before we go there, I didn't realize, do you know Bridgewater has a trademark on the phrase all-weather as it relates to investing?
Yep.
So I guess a bunch of people have been trying to use the phrase all-weather as it relates to funds and SMAs and all that sort of stuff, and they're starting to get legal stuff from Bridgewater, who filed for the trademark back in the early 2000s and has now started aggressively filing in China as well. I guess there's a lot of copycats. So interesting little tidbit. Not my main point. My main point, the question that seems to be coming up a lot, is people who are trying to design all-weather portfolios. I'm getting the sense they have the perception that that's like an up-only portfolio. And that's not how I think about an all-weather portfolio. And so I want to toss it over to you. You know, you're a man who thinks a lot about designing quote-unquote all-weather portfolios. What does all-weather really mean to you?
Let's start with, what did you mean by up-only, just so clarifying terms.
Like, no matter what market environment you're in, whether it's inflation, deflation, economic growth, economic recession, like this should be a portfolio that is going up. Like your all-weather portfolio should be up this year. It should have been up in March 2020. It should be up in 2008. It should be up in 2013. Like it should just be up.
Yeah, that's just never the case. And, you know, I actually try to never use the term all weather because, like I said, not just because, you know, Bridgewater has, you know, patented it, or trademarked it, but because, you know, I don't want to use somebody else's branding. And so I can't stand, like, when people are in industry, I always talk about that I build like all weather style portfolios. And I'm like, why are you using somebody else's branding? It doesn't make sense to me. You went on one of our shows, previous shows, you went on an epic rant about risk parity. And, you know, how everybody thinks like risk parity is 60-40 portfolios.
Which, by the way, my reply guys in Twitter are just nonstop. Every time I say risk parity or all weather, they're like, you mean like a 60-40, right? So shout out to the reply guys.
But what you pointed out is part of that risk parity all weather is it's not just stocks and bonds, it's commodities and other asset classes. And Dalio at one point tries to say they're looking for upwards of 16 uncorrelated return streams. The issue with all weather, like you said, it's like, yeah, it's not going to do unbelievably well in any environment. It's not going to be always up years. Like, for example, through the first half of the year, Bridgewater's all weather portfolio is down 14%. So like you are going to have drawdowns. You're just not going to experience the same kind of drawdowns as like a stock portfolio or a lot of times a 60-40 portfolio. The idea is you want to cover as many macroeconomic environments as possible using stocks, bonds, commodities, whether they're using tips, gold. I'm surprised they haven't even trademarked tips. I mean, that besides the Dalio trademarking all weather, he basically created the tips market. He needed it for his all weather portfolio. So he basically like talked everybody into creating the tips market. And once again, the idea of being tips will help hedge your inflationary risk. And so that's the real idea of all weather portfolio that I think when everybody talks about it is the idea of using broad diversification. But even broad diversification doesn't mean every month is up, every year's up, every quarter's up. Otherwise that's a Madoff fund. That's a Ponzi scheme. No matter like how broad diversified your portfolio is, you're going to be in drawdown at some point. I mean, it's inevitable. It's it's the nature of creating different portfolios and different products. And do you think now, like, this is what I wonder, this is maybe I thought you were going is post 2008, it was interesting. Like you looked at Google searches, etc. The search for like permanent portfolio and even sometimes all weather, but especially like permanent portfolio, they skyrocketed, right? And everybody usually piles into those trades after some sort of recession or cataclysmic event. Because everybody, there's a great line in Spy Game where, they're getting ready. Have you ever watched Spy Game? With Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. Are you serious? Oh my God, you'd love this film. It's one of my favorites. But he's Robert Redford's like the old wizened spy that trained Brad Pitt. And without telling you exactly what's going on, he's preparing for something that's going to happen in the future. And he's putting documents in like a burn bag and everything. And his secretary is kind of looking at him weird. And his secretary's name's Gladys. And he looks at Gladys. He goes, "Gladys, when did Noah build the ark?" She's like, she shrugs her shoulders. He's like, "Before the flood, Gladys, before the flood." And so that's what I think about that all the time is like everybody wants a diversified portfolio of protection after the flood. They would like you to retroactively give them that protection and that diversification because they've been riding it during the risk on good times and they never thought about it because none of their portfolio was painful at all. As we've talked about, broad diversification means there's a part of the portfolio like an asset class sleeve or a couple of them they're going to be very painful and be a drag on your portfolio. And that means you're broadly diversified. If everything feels great and you feel good and the financial media is telling you everything in your portfolio is fantastic and you should own all of it, like you should be really having some second thoughts. And so, now I'm just thrown off that you've never seen Spy Game. It's such a classic.
Yeah. Well, there's some of those movies that like you just never got around to watch. I just watched Top Gun, the new Top Gun last night.
The new one? What'd you think?
Yeah, it was great.
It is. Great. You can't hate on it. You just can't.
You can't. I could see why everyone liked it and why it did well internationally. Because like, the bad guys were just some nameless rogue state in the middle of nowhere. You had no idea what ethnicity they were. It just like, it didn't even matter. It had the appropriate amount of tiebacks to the last film. It was, I don't see how anyone could not like that movie. And then I caught some of the extras though, because my wife and I had to buy it because we were watching it at home. And I did not realize the extensive flight training they went. See, this is what I mean by this show. We'll talk about anything but finance. The extensive flight training the actors went through to actually just be able to get into those F-18s. So they had to do like what was effectively 3 years of flight school in 6 months. Tom Cruise is an avid aviationist. Is that how you would say it? Aviator, I guess. Avid aviator. Really loves flying planes. And he really wanted to make sure that the other actors truly understood what it was like to be in those planes. And so they were going up in these F-18s and basically had these cameras set up all around them while there was a pilot doing most of the maneuvers. And they were trying to act, but they were acting and then having to like read the scene in their head to know how long to wait to then say their next line, all while all these maneuvers are happening. I mean, really just, it's sort of cliche to say that they don't make films like that anymore, but like, when was the last time you saw a film where they didn't use CGI for that type of stuff? That they like legitimately were landing F-18s on a naval boat.
Well, I think I read or listened to. I mean, that's how the pitch worked. I think the director went to Tom Cruise and was basically knew that Tom Cruise likes to do all his own stunts and everything. And his literal pitch was like, "We're going to put everybody in F-18s, no CGI." And he was like, "Done, sold, I'm in."
Yeah.
Like, let's just make the movie. So like it's more about appealing to one person's box office appeal. But what I thought was interesting, like you just said, I noticed that you must have watched it, like came on like Amazon Prime like last night or the night before, right?
I think it was like
Is that
Apple movies
or whatever.
something.
It's hitting the streamers, but it was
Yeah.
$20, right? Basically.
Yeah.
So this is what fascinates me is like how long they kept that movie from the streamers and how much it was crushing at theatrical box office, like the first big theatrical box office, really, besides maybe some Marvel films coming back out of COVID. And then how much they delayed that going to streamers. And then when it hits the streamers, you can only buy for $20. There's no rentals for $5. I know they were going to extend that forever. I'm just thinking like the cash grab and
it's the old movie model for sure.
Yeah, because right? I think, yeah. Go ahead.
It's like the old DVD releases or the movie releases, whereas like you got the box office and then you knew there's a whole bunch of people who would be buying the movie. I mean, look, for me and my wife, I said, do I want to own this movie? I don't know. Probably not. I don't know if I'll ever watch it again. But if I'm sitting there with my wife and I don't know, we ordered some Thai food and paid $10 each to watch a movie, it's like, okay, it's date night. Like that's really not that bad at the end of the day.
Right, and you used to live in LA, where per ticket was probably $25. But
right,
like,
exactly.
why I'm fascinated by that too, and why I bring it up is like how much they're extending that and really manipulating and squeezing every dollar out of it. Is because I don't know if you know this, my mother, my family owns a single screen movie theater, and so there you have all this.
You
jigsaw
continue to be
puzzle.
the most interesting man I know.
Yeah, it's actually the oldest continually run like family movie theater west of the Mississippi. It's like 106 years old. But the idea is, though, that it's fascinating when you own a single screen theater is you have to have all of these jigsaw kind of puzzle pieces when you're putting together what films you're going to show over the next month. Because what happens is the studios control so much. And so if you take like a big blockbuster movie on the break, like let's say Top Gun, they're going to force you to show it for like 3 to 6 weeks minimum, right? And if you only have a single screen, you're making a huge bet before the movie's even debuted. But if you don't, if you wait those like 3 to 6 weeks, then you might only have to take it for a week to 2 weeks. And then, by the way, if you take it on the break, the percentage going back to the studio is higher. If you take it off the break a few weeks later, the percentage going back to the studio is lower. But then, so you
might miss that initial crowd, right?
You're missing the initial crowd. And then the question then becomes, I think people do know this inherently or intuitively, is if you own a movie theater, you're not in the movie business, you're in the concession business. And your margins on soda and popcorn are where you actually make your money. Like it's pretty ridiculous margins, but that's how you have to make it back because the studio is basically taking almost everything from the actual ticket price. Then you have to run your employees, you have to do all those sort of things. So you have to preemptively decide, is this going to be a big popcorn movie? How much of my audience is going to come to this and how much popcorn and soda they're going to buy versus maybe I might be able to sell more tickets to maybe an art house thing because I only have it for 3 days. But people coming to art house films aren't going to be as big as like soda and popcorn buyers. So you have this old like dynamic puzzle, like almost like, Taylor's essay of reality has a surprising amount of detail. Like everything's hard. Like, like you would think it's pretty straightforward to run like kind of a single screen theater, but these are the things that the real puzzle pieces that you have to manipulate and move and the decision making under opacity of making those calls before a movie comes out. Because what if everybody's predicting Top Gun's going to be the next big popcorn movie and it comes out and it's absolute bust and the rumor starts after like day one and now nobody shows up and now you're sitting on this film for like the next 4 to 6 weeks with no box office, nobody coming in to eat popcorn and soda, and you're just absolutely screwed.
By the way, that phrase you said, you'd think it would be easy. It's one of the things that I've changed in my mind about. I'm of the view the default is nothing is easy, because if we all knew that there was an easy way to make money, we'd all do it and the margins would get squeezed. So whenever I hear about a new business, I'm like, there's got to be something really hard about that business that I'm not aware of. Otherwise, everyone would do it, right? Beyond like, are you passionate about it? But yeah, if there was a known moneymaker. So we really went off topic here.
I'm going to bring us back, but I want to bring us back, but also like to your point, I want to say like any job, right? Like you look at somebody's job description or even what you think is like minimum wage rudimentary job, you start asking, I love to ask people details about what they do for a living. And then you just find out every job is not, there's no easy button kind of on anything in life. Right. And you always think the grass is greener, man. If I could just punch a clock, work a 9 to 5 and not have a lot of responsibilities, but you figure out pretty quickly, there's no such thing. But yeah, bringing it full back, you asked about all weather because you think they're starting to pop up in Twitter feeds and FinTwit feeds. But I'm curious, like, Do you think that's, once again, I was saying like after the flood, do you think that's just because the first half of the year has been terrible for 60/40 and that's why people are asking and talking about them?
Absolutely. I mean, as you pointed out, post 2008, there was a larger demand for all weather and permanent portfolio. I saw it in the tactical space, huge demand for tactical until about 2013. I mean, you saw the All Asset All Authority fund from PIMCO got massive. There's I think it was a First Eagle global tactical fund that got absolutely massive. One by one, they all had a ton of negative tracking error, and people sort of moved on. But 2008 resonated for years. I mean, right, you saw it in the options market as well. There was so much demand for protection. The best thing you could have done was sell protection in that era. I think people look for protection in a lot of different ways. And the easiest step for most people who don't have access to the derivatives market is obviously asset allocation. Whether they're changing their asset allocation to include diversifiers or they're making active asset allocation decisions. And so that's a lot of what you saw. And I feel like I'm seeing it again. I thought we would see it post 2020, but I think 2020 was over so quickly, and the pain was gone so quickly. Like if you slept through the month, you wouldn't, and looked at the market, you wouldn't have even known anything was wrong, right? And so from that point, I don't think it inspired action, where the prolonged drawdowns inspire action. And I think particularly for conservative investors who are not used to seeing, the Barclays Ag down 8, 10, 12%. Like that is something we haven't seen in a very long time. And I'm having conversations with advisors who are struggling to explain to their retired conservative clients why their 2080 portfolio is down so much this year, right? And so I am starting to hear more and more, maybe I should take an all-weather approach. One, what does that even mean? What does it include? But I still think the expectations are wrong, right? The way I think about this is there are some philosophical limits to diversification that we need to accept, right? If you are able to diversify away every risk so that no matter what scenario it is, you've got a portfolio that's up, you have either very expensively replicated the risk-free rate because it's a risk-free portfolio, or you've discovered some sort of arbitrage, right? Because if you had that portfolio, you would borrow money at the short-term interest rate, hand over fist, and buy that portfolio. Neither of which is likely true if you're just diversifying global assets. So there has to be some environment. If you expect a positive expected return, there has to be some environment under which your portfolio is going to struggle. And so I'm seeing people looking at all-weather funds that are down 5%, through January, end of Q2, that were down 5%, when a 60/40 is down, 18? And they're going, you're having a horrible year. All weather should be up. And I'm saying, these expectations people have seem completely detached from the reality of investing. And I think part of it is that name, all weather, perhaps that gives the idea that rain or shine, this portfolio should perform. And I don't think that's appropriate.
Quick side question. Do you feel that all weather and risk parity are synonymous, or do you think there's any slight differences there?
So I think what happened, if I were to sort of rewind history, is I would say you had all weather come out, and that was Dalio's risk parity implementation, right? Then it was synonymous. Panagora then turned it into something very quantitative. And I'm not sure the truly quantitative implementation of risk parity, where you're taking global futures markets and you're creating in a very quantitative way a covariance matrix and you're trying to balance these risks mathematically, is what Dalio had in mind when he was thinking about economic regimes, right? He's trying to say ex ante where these different assets belong in economic regimes and how to balance those economic regimes, whereas the very mechanical quantitative approach is relying on the covariance matrix to inform you how to find balance. And so I would sort of say, like, risk parity is a type of all weather, perhaps, but it veered off from what I think Dalio's original concept of all weather was, which was, sort of something similar to what Harry Brown's permanent portfolio originally was sort of inspired to be.
Yeah, I want to take it maybe in like slightly two different directions and actually maybe try to talk about it more specifically with maybe like toy models. Is if we take an all-weather portfolio, let's say it's global stocks, global bonds, commodity trend following, let's say it also holds a little bit of like gold and even Bitcoin, right? You're saying good, great app, broad diversification. That's kind of an all-weather implementation in one way, shape, or form. The one reason I never really love that is that, what happens if, stocks and bonds are on the rise and the trends, you're on the wrong side of the trends, and all of a sudden there's a liquidity event. And so therefore everything you have to ballast your portfolio because the trend was on the wrong side. And then the liquidity event, so everybody's actually selling the gold and Bitcoin, and so they don't want to. And so I'm like, what do you do in that scenario? And I was talking about this in, from 2015 to 2019, right? And then it perfectly happened in March of 2020. And this is why I always, I was like, this is why you need long vol and tail risk, is to kind of hedge these liquidity events. And so that finally happened. But then talking more specifically almost about this year, and this is what maybe people are missing about all weather or any sort of broad portfolio diversification. Just because you have the diversification doesn't mean you're entitled to any sort of return stream from any of those asset sleeves or those asset buckets. So I was bringing up, which you should have been on as well, on Raise Your Average podcast on Monday. Shout out to that crew. Is that this year it's been obviously a terrible year for stocks and bonds for 60/40 portfolio or just global stocks, global bonds. There's been unbelievable headwinds for like long volatility and tail risk strategies coming from a higher vol environment and having some sticky vol. And then, luckily, the trend following, commodity CTAs have done exceedingly well this year. And everybody's like, see, that's your ballast for like a long, protracted drawdown. And I'm like, not so fast. Like, that's kind of luck. Like, it just so happens that, in this kind of long, protracted drawdown, that we're also having volatility across, currencies and commodities and, different parts of those spaces. But there's nothing that say that has to coincide. Their expectation is over the last several decades it's happened to coincide. But I keep saying there's going to be a scenario, right, where stocks and bonds are grinding down, so you're not getting a pickup from volatility strategies, and then it's all quiet on the Western front for commodity strategies, and so you don't have anything in your asset class portfolio that's going to do well. Maybe you have some deterministic cash flows from like some real estate plays or something that can help you a little bit, but there's a time, no matter how broadly diversified you are, where everything's going to be slightly down because it's just a very quiet market. I think the analog would maybe be like 2015, is like everything was just down a few points. There's really nothing going on.
2018, I think, was another one of those markets where diversification sort of failed. And again, you have to have those years for positive expected return of a diversified portfolio. So I want to address a question that I get all the time, and I want your perspective on it. So Chris Cole wrote his paper about the Dragon portfolio, right? And so if we sort of think about the evolution of maybe all weather, right? You go back to like the Talmud, diversification, right? And then you walk way forward and you get Harry Brown, and then you get Ray Dalio, you get risk parity in a quantitative sense. And then I think you, with some of the work you've published, and I know we have to be careful about what we say there, and then Chris Cole really highlighted that while the economic quadrants, right, are important, there might be a third axis to this discussion, which is liquidity, right? And so having that long vol exposure can be a really important ballast. To really simplify what Chris did with Dragon, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the allocation ended up being 20% global stocks, 20% treasuries of sort of an undefined duration, which is a whole other issue, 20% CTA, 20% gold, I believe, and 20% long vol. And when I talk to someone who does not understand or trade volatility, they think of 20% long vol the same way you would think about 20% stocks. You take 20% of your money and you buy, right? And it's not, that portfolio is not saying, hey, take 20% of your money and go buy deep out of the money put options, right? That's not what 20% long vol means. And I was hoping maybe you could shine some light on what that really means. That if someone is thinking about including long vol in a all-weather type portfolio, how do you think about sizing that?
Yeah, that is the rub. And so you're talking more on almost a notional or nominal level, So when you think about your long volatility allocation, if in this Dragon portfolio framework of 20% each, then if I have 20% exposures to equities, and I'm trying to offset that with long volatility, then I want 20% of exposure in quotes. And that's the idea is for thinking about the notional coverage you're getting against your equity beta. And so that 20%, can be used in a variety of instruments. And the capital efficiency of those instruments or convexity or premium associated with them can be dramatically different. If you're using, intraday trend following to go short the markets using Delta One instruments, that's going to cost you quite a bit of money. But also intraday is actually a cash-free overlay. If you're going in and out of the markets on an intraday basis, your beta, you actually don't even need to provide any capital or margin to do that. But then if you're buying those deep out of the money tail risk puts, those things are very cheap as far as the premium outlay. And so, out of that 20%, you're maybe only allocate 2 to 3% of that to buying your puts. And then depending on then if you're using, put spreads or ratio back spreads, that might cost you a little bit more. And so that's the real primary difference is, how capital efficient are the instruments you're using, but then you're really toggling that notional or nominal exposure in relation to your equity beta. And it's never, there's never a perfect way to do that. There's no formula that actually works. So everybody's kind of, putting their finger up in the air to kind of guess at what that's like. And we and a lot of people just run all these shock tests of saying, if we're coming from this vol level and the sell-off's this fast, all of the, all these parameters, ceteris paribus, this is where, our put options should shock to, and this would be our exponential return. But the problem is you don't know exactly what that path dependency is going to look like. So that's why it's kind of nebulous of what is my actual nominal coverage that I'm coming up with. And that's, can be very difficult. And then even if you could toggle that perfectly, then when the event does happen, volatility can mean revert so quickly on you as well. Is like you're expecting your monetization to be perfect, and that's just impossible. So it's more, there's a lot of science to it, but there's more art to it when you're just talking about the nominal levels that you're trying to cover that exposure with. And so, yeah, it is a little misleading or confusing to say 20% in long volatility or 20% in tail risk, because you don't need all that capital to use it, but you have to think about the coverage you're using against your equity beta. Is that kind of a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean, when I read the paper, my interpretation, and it's been a while since I've read it, I may have missed some details, was that you were actually carving out 20% of your capital and potentially holding it in cash as collateral for long VIX type strategies or other long vol exposures. And you were probably measuring that in Vega notional, that you wanted 20%, of your portfolio in Vega notional. That might have been the wrong interpretation, but there's so many ways, right? Some people prefer to think of gamma notional. Some people prefer to think of Vega notional. Some people prefer to think about coverage of their equity, given certain scenarios. Long vol is, what's hard is you can sort of look at like the Eureka hedge index and say that's one unit of long vol, right? But how do you replicate that without sort of like the sizing is not necessarily that easy. So it's easy for me to say, okay, I want a portfolio that's 20% the Eureka hedge long vol index, 20% equities, 20% gold, 20% CTAs, 20% treasuries, or whatever it is, that 1/5 split each. But actually going about trying to figure out the positions that I would buy to replicate that Eureka hedge long vol index is non-trivial, right? Because that's an index of hedge funds. And you're certainly not taking 20% of your capital and lighting it on fire buying puts every month, because then you'll quickly go to zero. So it's it's an interesting exercise to think about how to appropriately sort of define the sizing of long vol from an asset allocation perspective.
Well, there's several things you said I want to pull on then there, and then we might be getting deep into the weeds eventually here. Is that one, the Eureka hedge long vol index sucks. That's caveat emptor there. That's a fancy caveat emptor. It's like there's a lot of survivorship bias. You need to look at the constituent funds that they put in there, how often they're changed out, what they're actually doing at those funds, and how much of it's long vol versus what's a lot of other stuff thrown in there. So that's one caveat. Then you said something perfectly. It's like you also have to think about your hedges. Is like you get to kind of choose one and choose wisely. They're like, right, do you want to offset your Vega exposure, gamma exposure, delta exposure? And by choosing one or two of those, there's going to be trade-offs and pulleys and levers that you're using there. And there's no perfect answer. There's no right answer for that. And so that's the difficulty. This is where we may get deeper in the weeds, but I love to try to explain this stuff is like margin usage when we're talking about futures and options. And I think most people that come from the equity world or securities world or even, fixed income, they don't really understand how futures work, and that's great. I love to explain it, but like the idea is, you could allocate 20% to a long vol manager, but what they're going to do is they're going to hold, they're going to be holding a lot of T-bills in cash in that scenario, because like you said, we were talking about the convexity or the capital efficiency of those instruments. So what will happen is, like, let's just take any CTA, whether it's trend following, anybody that's a commodity trend advisor. So basically they're basically just using the futures market. Let's just say they have a strategy that, they only have to put up 100,000 in margin a year, and they can make they make $100,000 a year. So they make 100% returns on this strategy. And because the capital efficiency of the futures, they only have to put up that 100,000 in margin. So they're great. I can make 100% return on an annualized basis. But you're going out to raise capital, and everybody's going to be scared to death of a strategy with that higher return and maybe that high of volatility. So then you just pick a window dressing number to overlay on top of that. So you said, actually, my strategy is $1 million for you to get access to it. It makes 100,000 a year. Therefore, it now makes 10%. And everybody goes, great. I love it. 10% with like 15 vol. Like I'm in. Give me that. And then you charge fees on that $1 million. And so if you start getting into even long vol space, and if we start talking about long vol space of using the VIX complex of contracts or VIX futures are actually not capital efficient compared to like E-minis. Like on E-minis, a lot of times your margin's only going to be 5% of the total value of the contract. But in a lot of FCMs are going to require upwards of 50% margin for the VIX contracts due to that volatility in VIX contracts. So that's why they're going to be less capital efficient. If somebody is expressing long volatility or volatility relative value using the VIX futures contracts, or even offsetting them either with calendars or even offsetting them with the E-minis, it's still going to require actually a lot of margin on that basis. And that's why it makes maybe more sense to allocate to that advisor that 20%, because maybe they're using 50% of that cash, but they're also basically deleveraging that portfolio, or adjusting that margin plus window dressing amount plus drawdown is what gives you that kind of nominal value of that portfolio.
Yeah, I think, again, you and I both think alike that capital efficiency is a massively underutilized tool for most investors, because unfortunately it does require trading derivatives, which can be a little bit scary, right? It is explicit leverage. But again, the ability to put up 5% of your capital to get the full dollar for dollar return of something like the S&P 500, or even less of your capital to get the full dollar for dollar return of intermediate term US Treasuries, is incredibly powerful from a replicating beta perspective, and allow you to do other potentially interesting things with your capital, should you so choose, or just sit on cash if you like having a big cash buffer there. Now, it's the tax considerations and all that sort of stuff to consider from these different choices. Like, you get 60-40 tax treatment, I believe, with the E-minis versus, buy and hold the S&P. You're going to get something much more advantageous as a U.S. resident or U.S. citizen. So there's all these sort of trade-offs you need to consider. But the opposite is true when you think about U.S. Treasuries. Like, the 60-40 tax treatment of U.S. Treasury futures means you get potential long-term cap gains trading Treasury futures, which you would never get just owning Treasuries, because you just be getting hit with the income. So there's some fascinating trade-offs there. And to your point, like, all of this stuff is important for the managers who are running managed futures and long vol strategies. Nothing that traditional long cash equities type managers would really ever think about.
So I want you mentioned one other thing that I want to go back and touch on. You had a statement that's like, if you actually had true broad diversification, you got basically everything you could in there, you might be then now replicating the risk-free rate. So you're almost like, you're basically saying, like, what's the point, right?
Well, what I'm saying is, if you do it to the point where you're up only in every environment, which I don't think is actually possible, but if you were conceptually able to do that, you either have an expensive risk-free rate or an absurd amount of alpha.
Yes, well, let's but I want to break that down for a second though too, because it made me think about it in the sense that, like, let's say you had broad diversification, and like you're saying, you're basically reducing a lot of those variables. So let's just say a toy model, your returns 3%, your vols like 4%, your max drawdowns like 5%. Okay, in this scenario, because you have all this broad diversification. So you're basically like, okay, you replicated the risk-free rate. And you go, why wouldn't I just take the risk-free rate or leverage up the risk rate and everything? Is like, if you're going to apply, and I know I say 3% return.
You can't lever up the risk-free rate.
What? Well, like 90-day T-bills, like in this example, like just let's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So so this is the point though, leverage, and this is what I'm getting at is like, and I specifically chose a 3% return because I think 90-day T-bills right now are like 2.7-ish%. And the question was like, in that scenario, which one would you lever up 4x? That broadly diversified portfolio where you've reduced the kind of noise to signal ratio, you've reduced the volatility tax, you've reduced the drawdown, versus levering up one instrument, even if you could like leverage up 90-day T-bills. Like, what would you do in that scenario?
Well, again, I don't think you can try to lever up 90-day T-bills. The cost is basically going to be 90-day T-bills. Your expected return is going to go to zero.
I'm just
right.
Hypothetically, if you could lever up the risk-free rate, would you rather, like what I'm saying is like cash or T-bills will likely over some 100-year cycle would lose more.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but again, like the whole point, at least modern portfolio theory, is like we measure everything in excess returns to the risk-free rate because it's expected that the risk-free rate is what you can borrow at. So if you levering the risk-free rate means you are getting a zero return, and the risk-free rate has zero vol, right? So it's just like you would literally get zero return, zero vol if you tried to lever the risk-free rate because the cost of borrowing is equal to what you're investing in. What I'm saying is like, again, if you can diversify so much that you're always up, your example of like expected return of 3%, vol of 5, drawdown of 5. What I'm saying is like, there is no vol really, or there's no vol that ever, like you can't lose money. Like when you hit that limit of diversification, like for that expectation of which you build such a diversified portfolio, you don't lose money. I'm saying it's impossible. You can't have that portfolio unless you've somehow magically discovered an arbitrage or you have an absurd amount of alpha, because that is by definition what the risk-free rate does. The risk-free rate is the only thing that's up only in every environment because it's risk-free. Now, again, let's pause. Does the risk-free rate even exist?
But
like,
that's why we're talking past each other. Yeah, because I'm like,
in a wonderful
that's what my point
conceptual
was.
world of like finance classroom. Does the risk-free rate even exist? Up for debate whether US T-bills are really an effective risk-free rate. And again, we're measuring this all nominally, not in real terms, which is another whole issue. But from that perspective, like in the classroom philosophical side of things, again, like there are limits to what diversification can truly achieve if you want to have a positive expected return.
Well, that's why I was asking that in a reverse way. That's what I was getting to. Is like, does that mean risk-free rate? Because would you take it if you had to lever it? And in real terms, how much has it lost historically? And that's my point. Is like, would you choose a single instrument over broad diversification? And do you think part of it, like, I think you had a comment on this the other day, is like the what was posted on Twitter about the Verision Fund, which is basically, my understanding is kind of like a singular fund for a fireman's pension. But they basically had, what is it, like almost 20 years of every annualized return being positive. Like,
yeah,
and
really impressive to the point of like, you're like, what is this? And is this Madoff?
Yeah.
And by the way, no slander against, yeah. I don't know this fund at all. I've never looked into it. It's just like an absurdly good track record.
But that's why I bring it up, is because when you're talking about all weather portfolios, and if Dalio saying you want 16 uncorrelated return streams, I'll argue if that's possible or not. But I think that's what you're seeing with, like, let's say this Verision Fund. I haven't been able to dive into exactly what all the components are, but the same with like Balyasny, Millennium, all these pod shops, is like they're having 50, 100, 200 different strategies and trying to figure out the gross correlations across the entire book. But to me, they're the ones that are taking this, if we want to call it quote unquote all weather style, to the extreme.
But
and they're constantly producing positive numbers.
Weather. So like, okay. I would sit there and say that's alpha. Those firms are trading. They have trading strategies that are extracting alpha from the market, and they are able to be up a significant portion of the time. Yes, through diversification, but it's the alpha they're extracting. When I think of all weather, when I think of Dalio, his original concept, it was just balancing beta, right? And so I shouldn't be able to just balance betas and get rid of all the risk and create a positive expected return. If you start saying to me, hey, we have 100 pods that are all doing equity, long, short, and futures flow trading and index additions and deletions, and they all are uncorrelated from each other, and we can add all these strategies together, and it's up only all the time, I would say, actually, that's possible. But it's not. It's a different type of portfolio. To me, that's an alpha strategy. that's not all weather. Does it end up being all weather for someone? Potentially, but not the way Dalio talked about it. It's not like these shops are sitting around going, oh, we're trying to balance all these asset classes for economic regime exposure. They're just trying to have all these pods of alpha that are uncorrelated.
No, that's fair. Like, okay, I'll swallow that. That the difference is all weather is balancing betas, and these pod shops are pursuing alpha. But I think you can anticipate where my next question's going. Is that, to me, when you say alpha, is almost like correlations. Like, show me the bookends that you're using. What time horizon are you using for alpha, or what are you using for correlation? And so my argument would be at these pod shops is, if they are producing any alpha over a certain time horizon, they're also rebalancing with that with the rest of the portfolio and the rest of the pods. So they're basically scale trading the equity curves of these pods. And so that alpha that you think is there for maybe 2 to 3 years and then goes away, and they cut those managers, is it was never there in the first place. It's just kind of, it's allostatic bands going around the mean. And they're just harnessing, the up times and then rebalancing with the down times.
Maybe. I'm just answering that with maybe, because you want to, I've never operated inside a Millennium. I looked at the public deck. By the way, here's a little free alpha for people. If you're in the fund space or you're interested in investments, you should know that public pensions put all of their meeting documents online, and you can search for them in Google. And so if you want to see what an institutional product pitch deck looks like, you can look up these police and fire and local pension minutes, and within them will be embedded the pitch decks that institutions use to pitch their products. So you can find this online with a little Google searching. Most people don't seem to know that, but all this is public record, and you are entitled to go look at it, and all the minutes are available. So that said, from reading the document, and again, I have never done due diligence on this firm, and I don't really know them, and I don't know anyone that works there. It does seem like they have some long-standing pods, right, that have been able to improve and continue to extract. It's not just like alpha signal turnover. I'm sure they are evolving their process all the time. But like, and this will set me off. Like, it's not just Shannon's demon here, right? It's not like they're all random and they're just rebalancing. And if you say that, I swear I will quit this stream. That's like, you're gonna trigger me. I'm not triggered easily, but that will trigger me. So yeah,
I plead the fifth. So before you get upset, I can change the subject unless you have something else to say on this.
No, I got nothing else to say. Nothing to say to you, man.
And by the way, I have been, just for your sake, I do not call it, I call, as one would say, diversification, rebalancing premium. I still throw it in there just to get you, but
that's better.
Yeah. But I've had to have a lot of those conversations, both live and in person this week about this very subject. I want to go back to rum. And so, what I always love about diving into any industry is you have to just learn all the nomenclature, and all the nomenclature is just a barrier to entry, right? This is what I hate about every business is like, revenue minus expenses is profit, right? But every single industry has different terms and different things they use. Like in stock evaluation, you're asking what the multiple is, in commercial real estate's what the cap rate, all this nomenclature is just used as a barrier to keep, or moat to keep people out. So when I'm researching the rum stuff, do you know what the acronyms LAA and IBC stand for?
No.
All right. Didn't think you would. So IBC means intermediate bulk container. And this is for like shipping primarily liquids. A lot of them, they just look like a big plastic cube. I actually see a lot of them at the wineries here. I just didn't know if they were called IBCs. But the standard unit for that is 1,000 liters. So to import, a rum blend that we'd want to put together from Europe, you have the minimum order quantity is an IBC, which is 1,000 liters. Okay. But now here's where it gets in. This is where the LAA comes in. And LAA is liters of absolute alcohol. So what happens is you buy 1,000 liter unit, right? And that's your minimum order quantity. But what actually goes in there is only 650 milliliters at LAA of liquid absolute alcohol. So it's 650 liters at 100% alcohol by volume.
Okay.
Right. So then technically you're only getting 650 liters, or you could look at it as 1,000 liters at 65% ABV.
Filler in the rest, or is it literally like the container's just like 2/3
Yeah.
full?
Still working on all that,
Okay.
because like we're gonna get into like the public math and the conversions here. Is okay, and this is what it's obvious now, but I didn't realize. Obviously, they're going to ship at 100% alcohol by volume, but like let's say your average rum is 40% ABV. So
Right.
when you get it, you are going to dilute it, or what we call in wine country, water back. You're going to add water to dilute that 100% ABV. So this is also, so obviously now becomes a convenience and weight thing for shipping. You obviously just want the pure alcohol shipped, but then I didn't realize that all these spirits brands are diluting at the bottling process.
So does this mean we also now need to like think about? I didn't even consider this. Do we need to now think about the source of the water we want to use?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, I didn't even think about that
Like,
one
do
yet.
we
I'm
want
just
like
getting.
volcanic water from
Oh
Fiji? You
man,
know,
this is now okay.
some
This
deep
is not.
well in the Caribbean.
I don't think this is going to surprise you. But years ago, I did try to find comprehensive studies on all of the natural water sources in America and all the aquifers, but getting into actual their mineral content, because as we all know, my love of liquid death right now. For most of my life, I actually love Gerolsteiner, the German water, because it's the Cadillac of mineral waters, high magnesium content, high in other mineral qualities. And actually, one of the best sources I could find in America is actually not far from my house. It's a place out near like Modesto, and it has almost the same mineral content and qualities and pH level as Gerolsteiner, which may not be great for blending
I
with
was going
rum.
to say this brings up. So I didn't realize until I like sort of tasted different waters that like water tastes very different. It's not the
Very
water
different.
itself, obviously. It's what's in the water, but it brings up like how much that could actually vary the taste of the rum itself based upon what you dilute it with.
That's a very good point. And I'm so obsessed with this stuff. I actually took a photo of a water from Oregon last night because the taste was so good. So and I hadn't seen it before. So I didn't think you'd be surprised to know I've tested a lot of probably dozens of mineral content for springs around the country. So when that time comes, we'll figure out what kind of water we need to add to it.
We'll do a water tasting as well.
Yeah. So then, okay, so you're figuring out the shipping. You're getting your IBC, just 1,000 liters, but you're getting only maybe 650 liters of 100% ABV. Then you're going to dilute it back down. Then, of course, you got taxes and permitting and shipping. What was interesting is actually the shipping for the IBC was quoted roughly, $700 to $1,200 for the actual shipping. And I was like, wow, that's a lot less than I expected in general, because I just thought shipping from Europe would be through the roof.
I'm just trying to imagine taking delivery of that, though.
Yeah.
Like I know I'm not just showing up to the boat with my
No, you're
car
not.
and a trailer being like, load up 1,000 liters of booze, please. But
yeah,
there's something very absurd about that.
It's not going to work, because I think we talked about last time is we have to have a bonded warehouse set up to be able to take it in, and we have to have all the permits and the bonds. So like starting to dive into the permits, there's at least 5 different federal agencies that we have to get permits from or pay a vig to. I'm sure that like just looking at your face is like, that's amazing. Like, and then I was starting to get all the information on taxes, and I don't think you'll be surprised to learn that taxes are going to be one of the biggest expenses to putting together a spirits brand, which is not necessarily surprising. And there's some tax breaks, I think, in the last few years. But if those breaks go away, I mean, we're talking a lot. Like, for example, we're still trying to nail down what the US would be, but I was told it was 16 euros per LAA per like pure liter of absolute alcohol. 16
euros per liter
if you're importing into the Netherlands. But obviously they're trying to be like protectionist. Like that one was like, I mean, you start really adding in those
the importing is not $1,000. It's going to be more like 15,000.
That's the shipping fee, right? Then we have the taxes. We have to get an importer's license, but you can also be under somebody else, especially if they have the bonded warehouse. So that's the other thing with like bonds and everything. You can kind of piggyback on other importers, and it's like an importation or wholesale license. But like the amount of 3-letter acronyms for government agencies, like I was saying, I was counting it up this morning. It's at least 5. So you
want to know what? We have experience dealing with government agencies. I feel like working with the SEC and FINRA has prepared me for this.
Yeah. So I'm getting, more information. Obviously, the cost of putting the blend together is one thing. Depending on what you choose, age, what countries, all of that stuff goes into the factors of the blend. Figuring out minimum order quantity of those 1,000 liters in the IBC. What's the shipping cost? Then figuring out the taxes on the importation of that. And then, like you said, I hadn't even thought about the water yet. but now I'm going to dive into the 5 government agencies we have to deal with. The other one, then I think the next process too, I've been trying to ask some of my neighbors about is glass costs. I think that's going to be surprising how much glass is right now, and just sourcing glass, because there's probably a shortage that just, it happens all the time. Even aluminum cans too, like pre-pandy, like aluminum cans were like, you couldn't find them anywhere. Especially when like the rise of IPAs and local brewery, like, microbreweries, like you could not get like a 12-ounce aluminum can. Like it was crazy, like trying to find that kind of stuff. I was trying to source that before.
I got to tell you, I'm kind of surprised. I'm taking a total left field turn here. Like, I'm kind of surprised there's not like a date night activity in Brooklyn where they like do this. They're like, you go bring your date and we'll mix spirits together and you can have your own special take-home bottle. Like, I feel like that should be a thing.
Funny shit. I'm so mad at myself. I don't know the name, but over in Sebastopol in the Barlow, there's a distillery over there that's all run by women, and that's one of the things they do. You pay them to come play distiller for the day.
Yeah,
and they have all these like distilling workshops. Yeah, you come and work. You basically are like, you come intern for them for the day, but you pay them hundreds of dollars to intern for the day and learn how to like make spirits.
Yeah, if you like. Right. Again, we've never done this. So to pay a master distiller to be able to shadow them and learn and ask questions and figure out the process. Yeah, that's like, again, like we talk about with finance, like there's a huge aspect of a lot of trades that is apprenticeship. One of the big regrets of my career is I did not, out of school, go work for other people. It was a very fortunate turn in my career, but also like there's a lot of experience that I missed out on that's very valuable, particularly when you talk about more esoteric derivatives markets, that this knowledge is just passed down from people who have traded it. And it's easier to learn from people who have the actual experience than it is to try to figure out on your own most of the time. And so like I would imagine, a master distiller has a huge amount of knowledge that if you just sort of take the top little bit would put you leagues ahead of trying to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've always wanted to do is I guess you can also go, I'm pretty sure you can go spend the day, especially if you know somebody up in the hills of Jamaica with the master distiller at Appleton is Joy. And she's been around there forever. And that's one of the things I've always wanted to do.
Appleton Joy.
So
delicious.
So good. Delicious. But yeah, that's one of the things. It's like, I think no matter what, that's on our bucket list. I want to meet Joy. I want to hang out with Joy, pick her brain for what we can, but like, maybe that's one of our wedges to get in there with Joy. But another thing you said, this is going to take us on maybe a different tangent, is I always love those kind of questions. Like, so when somebody says, who are your mentors or how many mentors you have, is your answer 0?
It depends on what you're talking about. Like on the business side, my father was an entrepreneur. I spent a life unintentionally and intentionally absorbing all of his business lessons that he's tried to pass down. He never really explicitly tried to teach them or give me advice. Like he very much instilled in me giving, like, you shouldn't give advice. You should just sort of maybe tell a story as that someone's situation reminds you of, and let them figure out whether it's applicable, because you don't ever know all the facts about what someone's going through. But yeah, so from what I say, he mentored me. I don't know if it was explicit mentorship, but I absorbed a huge amount of information from him. My business partner, Tom, at NEWFOUND is probably 10 or 15 years my senior, I guess 15 years my senior, has a deep breadth of corporate legal experience as well as entrepreneurial experience that I've learned a tremendous amount from. And then I think for me, like a lot of the mentorship isn't explicit. I've just really tried to work to expand my network of experts that I can tap into for any subject at any time. I sort of refer to it as like my outer brain, where it's like, I'm not smart enough to figure out 99% of things, but I'm smart enough to figure out there's a person I know that probably has the solution that I can call. And so is that explicit mentorship on stuff? No, but when it is like when there's a specific topic I need help with, I just, it's like point in time mentorship, I guess.
Yeah, I think, but in ancient Greek philosophy, that's more like techne versus episteme. Like, episteme is like a framework for thinking about the world and understanding your experience, where techne is like a technical question. Like, how do I get from A to Z? And they can just give you that answer of like,
right,
Google Maps. So yeah, it's just, I always just hated that that advice of like, go get a mentor. It's like, what? Like, this is said by people that go to like Ivy League schools that have a broad Rolodex with their parents and their friends and all of this stuff. And I'm just like, what kind of solution is that? Like, I've never had any mentors. And besides, like, maybe in the Goodwill Hunting sense of I read a lot of books, but like that idea of like, just go get yourself a mentor is like, and also like, even if you had connections with some of those people that would be potentially good mentors, assuming your circle has that kind of ability, it's like assuming they have the time to work with you at all is it's kind of insane to me. But it's always like,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, please.
Just want to say I'm super proud of us. I was just looking at the time. It's 56 minutes in. And despite the fact that this week has been filled with economic news, of the student debt forgiveness, as well as Jackson Hole today, and the market, last I checked, the market's down like 3% right now. We're just like not talking about it, other than me talking about it right now. I'm very proud of us.
I almost tweeted the other day, what does FinTwit know about student debt?
About as much as FinTwit knows about everything else FinTwit gets up in arms about.
But I thought there's so much art and a chef's kiss to that. It's like, one, they don't know like all these dilettantes, but like two, like you just have trolls on either side coming out with a comment like that. Like, yes. It was like, it was just, but I didn't want that smoke, man. I just didn't want to look at like the badges on my Twitter. Like I just, I didn't have the stomach to like kind of deal with that kind of shitstorm and putting something out like that. But yeah, the hot takes. My hot take. I was saying Hulu's the amazing best platform right now. That's my hot take.
The other one that FinTwit seems to know a lot about is European energy right now, and electricity grids in France, and not understanding how futures curves work and forwards curves. It's just, again, like I guess we're all experts in everything now. That's what we get paid to be, rather than admitting we don't know. But it has been an interesting week. I don't know. I find this market, I was trying to explain to someone, I will do a little market talk right now. I find this market very different than past markets I feel like I've lived through, where this market feels explicitly event driven. And what I mean by that is we know the market is looking towards central bank policy. When I say we know, you probably disagree. I believe the market is looking towards central bank policy. Central banks, the Fed has explicitly said they're going to quote unquote be data driven. And that data is coming out not in real time, but with delay. And so we have to wait for the data to come out. And then we have to try to figure out what the Fed reaction function is going to be. And then we have to figure out what that reaction function is going to impact over time. All of which is very difficult. But my broad point being, you can't speed run that. Like, you just need to wait for time to pass, and you need to wait for the Fed to explicitly state what their plan of action is. And so to me, it's one of those, like, it creates a slow grind in the market, either a slow grind up, down, or sideways, but it doesn't lead to fast market action, because the news that needs to be digested, we know is getting trickled out slowly over the next 6 to 12 months, which hasn't really been the case over the last decade. A lot of it was like very fast, immediate, digestible news that the market could figure out, and using air quotes for those listening, figure out, and try to move on from and look into the future. At this point, there's there's a sequence of steps that have to take place, and it's very path dependent and very conditional as to what central banks are going to do. And you can't fast forward that. So you're just sort of stuck waiting for time to pass. And I think that's frustrating a lot of people.
Right. Assume with the preliminary assumption that like the Fed truly matters. And I was only laughing in that when you said the Fed's reaction function, because like you were just saying is like how everybody's like very dilettantish and everybody's looking at European, energy flows. Is like it's always amazing to me how the vocabulary always changes. And I've heard Fed's reaction function now so much in the last few years. Like you remember a few years ago, it was like let's double click on that to like dive down deeper. Or now people are talking about like seasons of their lives, and it's just always interesting to me how like the vocab can catch fire, and then you have to be one of the cool kids. You have to regurgitate that vocab, and then it sounds like you're. Well,
I've been trying to regurgitate Gen Z vocab, and I'll tell you that does not make me a cool kid. I have no idea.
Effect.
I always wondered. When I was younger, I was like, how do people just not stay up with lingo? And then slowly but surely, as I got into my 30s, I was like, what are these kids saying? None of these words make sense, and no one would explain it to me. And frankly, I'm too embarrassed to ask.
I remember
that's bussin'.
I got no cap. I remember one I wanted to talk to you about is I saw this morning that My First Million podcast pulled off their camp MFM. So I guess like 3 weeks ago, Sean tweeted out that like, hey, I want to do like a little camp experience to get a bunch of people together or whatever. And like they turned it around in like 3 weeks, and they got like 30 people together at like a large Airbnb they rented in North Carolina, and they got like Mr. Beast to show up, Hassan Minaj, like, and like all these people, and like it was just from that one tweet, and then their audience of entrepreneurs. So like, I'm just laying it out there for the booty crew. Like when is Camp Booty Crew, or what are we gonna call the Booty Crew cruise? Like
Camp Booty Crew. The Booty Crew. Did you just say the Booty Crew cruise? I'm trying to imagine explaining that one to my wife. I'm going on the Booty Crew cruise. Oh, okay. That's enough.
No, that's why I knew that one would get you in the end. As I was texting you the other day, it's like, but also your podcast is called Flirting with Models. You know how many people told me not to name my fun cockroach? Like this is like ridiculous. But then I was telling you the other day about the kids these days, you didn't know about like Tiny Meat Gang, and like just how funny these names catch on.
But I will say there was a very large institution that refused. They had a very senior person at their firm come on my podcast, and they refused to share the podcast, which, by the way, I don't care if they share or not, but they like their whole PR team was like, we cannot promote this podcast because of the name. The name is sexist. Flirting with Models. I was like, I don't know how it's sexist. For all you know, I'm gay. Like, so I don't know. Like I do sort of say like names don't matter and let's have fun. And on the other hand, I do know like, what, sometimes there's just some people that want you on the straight and narrow. And finance is one of those places they sometimes want you on the straight and narrow. That said, I'm also all for just planting your flag and giving the middle finger to the people who don't want to play ball. There's enough people out there who do like having a little fun.
So what do we? I mean, you're gonna be well removed from living in a Caribbean island. So like, when's the time to go back? And then is that like the Booty Crew Cove? Like, what's the, do we?
You're really pushing this, huh? Okay. Well, look, we're over an hour now. It's Friday afternoon. Market's closed. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I do want to say, you'll see, I've got my sweater on. Jason's got his sweater on. I believe Tyler has his sweater on behind the scenes. We have reached out to this company about doing a special run of these sweaters. So if you are interested, so we can show them there is interest. If you either want a special run of this sweater, comes in a variety of colors that we can try to get a Pirates of Finance discount code for, or even a version of this sweater that is the Pirates of Finance logo, which you can see. Am I pointing in the right place?
Yeah, perfect. You nailed it that time.
Right there. If you want that logo on a sweater, we can potentially get those made. So if you're interested, Booty Crew, let us know in the comments. We'll read them as always. Thank you for joining us. It's been fun, Jason. Do we have outro music? We need outro music.
Oh, actually, well, hold on. Let me get in here. And I've been great, everybody. See you next Friday. Appreciate everybody being here live, and we'll see you in a week.
We're still